In this lesson, we'll discuss basic scripts in Opus. So scripts in Opus can be thought of as any chain of actions you want to perform when some event happens. The event could be a state change in a component, a window resize, a click on a button or container, hover on an icon. All of those things are events in Opus. So very often you will want to do something when an event fires. The actions could be things like call a gateway, call an API, transform the values from an API, set a state of a component, things like that. So what we have here is a dashboard with a single input inside a container. And what I'd like to do just as a start is just show you the basic structure of a script. So let's put the script on the input. We have a property called scps, which stands for scripts, and it goes inside props. The script is an array because we can have multiple scripts, and a script is an object. So we have an empty script inside the scripts array, and almost always you'll add triggers to your scripts. Triggers are events that your script should listen to. So triggers is an array because you can listen to multiple events, and a trigger is an object again, and each trigger has an event. Inside this lesson notes, you'll see a link to the documentation on triggers. We can see all the different triggers we have available. As a start, let's just add an onMount event. So this event will fire when the component mounts, when it's rendered the first time. All scripts also need actions. Without actions, the script won't do anything. Actions is an array because you can have multiple actions, and each action is an object. Actions will be run sequentially, and actions will wait for previous actions to complete. So if you have two actions, this action will need to complete first before this one will run. All actions need a type, and again, in the lesson notes, we'll have a link to all the action types that are available. Very commonly, you'll use a setState action. So a setState action will set the state of a component. You can kind of think of this as a flow, because we're modifying a state in the same way that a flow modifies a state. Except in this case, we need to specify what the value should be because we're not flowing from something. So we need to specify which key we want to change. In this case, let's change the value, and then we need a value. So what should the value be set to? Let's make it mounted. So now when the input component mounts, we'll set the state of the value key to a string. We see that running. So this will only run the first time, just on mount. If I clear it, it won't set it again. We can also change different states or multiple states. So let's make a copy of this one. Now we have two set states, but in the second one we want to change the color value to red. So now when the component mounts, we'll change the value to the string, we'll change the color to red. We can also combine set states if you have many states you want to set using setMultiState. Now we have to specify just value, which is an object of all the states we want to set. So we want to change the value to the string, and we want to change the color to red. Now we can delete those because we have one action that's doing all the work for the same result. You'll notice that we haven't been specifying a target for these actions. If we want to change the target, we can, but then we need IDs, obviously. So what we can do is let's move this script to the container here. So now when this container mounts, it will set these states. But obviously we have the situation where it doesn't help us to change the value or the color of this component. We want to change the input. So let's give this input an ID. And then we can specify a target. So when this container mounts, I want to change the state of the input. Something you might run into now and then, or fairly often, depending on the situation, is you might have something where you're setting a state for something that isn't rendered yet. That's because we're looking at the onMount for this component. So this component might be rendered, this container might render, but the input might not be there yet. In this case, because it's a simple dashboard, it is rendered. But if the component you're affecting is deep down in the chain, this will not work. So in this situation, the fix is easy. We can just specify a source for the event, which will also be my input. So now we're saying that when my input mounts, I want to change the state of my input. There are also other ways around this, which we'll discuss in future lessons. Very often you'll want to debug your scripts to see why they're not working properly. There are two ways in which we can do that. The first way is we can add log true to any action. When we do that, let's just open DevTools over here. When we do that, we'll see our action config being logged. So we see it as a target type, and there's the value we've set. In this case, we know exactly what it will look like because there's no dynamic values inside this action, but mostly you will have dynamic values. Another way we can debug is by using a log action. So making a new action, the type is log, and we can specify a message. This is often used if you don't know if scripts are being run at all. Then you can see my script definitely did run. Something else we can do is recreate what a flow does using a script. So for example, let's say we wanted to flow from this input value to this container's background color. For a start, let's initialize this one as light gray, which is the background color. Let's remove these actions. Can keep this for now. And let's put a flow here just to see what we want to achieve. We want to flow to the container on the outside, which doesn't have an ID yet. To key. And we're flowing from our value, so I don't have to specify the from key. So let's just give an ID to this quickly. So now I'm flowing my value to my container's background color, which by default is light gray. So now let's recreate this as a script, because by default, all flows are essentially scripts that have a very common form. We won't need this ID anymore. So what we'll do is we'll have a new kind of event called onStateChange. And the source remains my input. So whenever my input has a state change on the value key, we want to perform a setState on ourselves, so I can ignore the target because it's myself. The key I want to affect is background color, and the value will have to be defined by whatever the input value is. For now, let's just hard code this to pink. So onMount, you see this is firing because because there was actually a state change, because initial states do count as state changes. It did not count as state changes for scripts. Am I misspeaking? They do count. Sorry. So on state change, my input value, we do a set state of background color to pink. To make this dynamic, to actually read the value of this, we need to use a script accessor. Script accessors are can get very complex. It's important for you to understand the basics so that more complex accesses in the future do not confuse you. So any script accessor looks like this. It will have two round braces with some content, followed by the two closing braces, or two curly braces, followed by some content and the closing curly braces. We're only going to discuss round braces in this lesson, and we're only going to discuss this form, state.id.key. So this allows us to access inside a script the state of a component. This is called a script accessor. So instead of defining the background color as pink, I can say state dot my input dot value. Now when my input has a value change, we're setting our background color to the input's value, just as the script would have done.